Part 2. The Dogmatist. The dogmatic urge implores us to be certain of things. Through the embodiment of the archetypal dogmatist, boundaries are formed, answers can be given, and things can be known. This knowing is always in some sense bounded with the caveats of assumption. The dogmatist has an inability to cognate in a substantively unbounded manner, and hence access to the outside of pure philosophy in the iconoclastic manner. In the realm of philosophy, the dogmatic is the cognitive space of definitive judgment and assertion, which gives rise to an assumptive unitary ideal. This is normatively projected onto the dogmatic subject, and as a result is to be approximated through the footing provided by the axioms of the sub-question. The dogmatic world is one divided by propositional knowledge. There are a list of assertions to be discovered through the employ of intellectual economies. All inquiry is a puzzle to be completed. An example of this phenomena are the end of history proclamations of materialist science. The proposed result of an endless anticipation of the encyclopedic discovery of all propositional knowledge. This comes with constant jubilant announcement that we are but a few mere decades, which is coincidentally an arbitrarily bounded human-based time period, of declarative facts away from complete knowledge. This manifests in an ideal and eschatology of converging knowledge, a finish line which the dogmatist is myopically driven towards. Dogmatism is at its base religious. Dogmatic assumptions form doctrines, and the focus of cognitive attention becomes an idol. This is not to say that the boundaries cast are metaphysically theistic, but can also inhabit its inversion in metaphysical atheism, which is equally philosophically assumptive. The urges of dogmatic thought create grounded shelters from the inhuman horror which is the torrential cognition of the iconoclast. For example, the assumptions which inflexible natural law present, the sub-question of materialism, provide a groundwork for the generation of knowledge which is just as metaphysically dogmatic as a more traditional metaphysically conscious faith. This is not to say the dogmatist isn't creative. The dogmatic urge manifests great artifices to its idols. Both the artwork of the Sistine Chapel and the precision of the Large Hadron Collider are equally great temples of dogmatism. Although these are artificial products of the assumptive sub-question, they constitute an intellectually artistic act and by nature of their basis in the casting of definitive judgment. Philosophical judgment is a creative decision within an existence which seems uncaring to the nature of that decision. This makes philosophical decisions deeply human. In an attempt to formalize the cognitive mode of dogmatism, I offer the following definition. The dogmatist. 1. Intellectually engaged and thus bounded to a single or set of sub-questions. 2. Acts intellectually with assumptive epistemic certainty, implicating a meta-question opinion, metaphysics, metaethics, etc., with ultimate truth status. 3. Inclined to protect the integrity of the sub-question to which they have cognitive allegiance. This can be enacted through intellectual venom or physical force. The following are some examples of high-level dogmatic sub-questions, which are supersets of further assumptive sub-questions, followed by their presumed axioms. Science, materialism and empiricism. Religion, metaphysical supernaturalism. Philosophical schools, metaphysical assertion and or normative value assertion, a meta-ethical judgment. The methods of the dogmatic urge have a tendency to imply linearity in both temporal progression and accumulating measurement. Temporal progression meaning that cognitive production within the sub-question will deterministically increase its approach towards and completion of the implied goal over time, inevitably. The hubris of this is that it makes no space for regression or wrong turns, which are a fact of the messiness of substantive reality. By accumulating measurement, I mean that the logic of the sub-question, being entirely internally consistent, implies by the very nature of the dogmatic intellectual frame that the fruits of cognitive production only appear to be ever increasing and self-engineering in tighter efficiently. The dogmatist, in their purest form, has the ever-approaching unity in sight, towards which it can only see itself getting closer and closer over time. With this stated, the religiosity of the dogmatist is clear. Within the walled garden of the sub-questions, an intellectual oasis whose architecture is an entirely reinforcing logic, the excitement never stops building. The intense climax of the dogmatist would be the final congress with their truth. This truth, however, by virtue of the self-limiting nature of the sub-question, is forever approaching, but never arriving. The dogmatic process simultaneously sees its project on the verge of completion, yet is reliably pleasantly surprised and elated at the fruits of the next effort for the cause, despite their continued separation from the eschatological promise. The latest innovation never provides a convergence on a unitary and complete truth. The excitement of intellectual discovery is a pre-climax faux orgasm, which is ever tightening the dogmatists to their convictions. This decreases the chance of escape as the intoxicant of knowledge becomes the only thing visible as they descend deeper into the bounded pleasures of cognitive desire. This economy of cognition provides its own microcosm of meaning and entertainments. Intellectual discovery, debate, performances of rhetoric, and exhibitions of the wonders provided by internally consistent logic. When they are able to look backwards, the dogmatist gazes onto the past through rose-tinted nostalgia, forgetting any hardships, disappointments, and false prophets, which are the reality of any religiosity. This manifests in reverence for institution, regardless whether the institution retains its deserving faculties for prestige. The dogmatic urge is not only an inhibitor of self-reinforcement through libidinal cognition, but the means whereby all structured things become outdated and stagnant, which gives impetus to iconoclastic intellectual demolition. This constant pressure from the dogmatic past converges on the present and buckles into various ideologies, cultural practices, and eschatologies. These intellectual structures and expressions are exhibited from movements in a state of dogmatism, those states being primarily influenced by the dogmatic urge. Organizational flood myths, doomsday prophecies, proclamations of near completion, and celebration of breakthroughs are all expressions of dogmatic cognitive production. The certainty of dogmatism strokes intellectual vanity and blindness in a self-reinforcing internal logic. The dogmatist is enamored by their own reflection. New protective boundaries are constantly drawn up, protecting the unitary crystalline beauty of the edificial sub-question. A beauty which makes it appear perspectively irreplaceable and the single expression of ultimate truth to cognitive adherence. Lines are constantly drawn around the dogmatic boundary with decreasing finesse and intellectual honesty, yet with increasing fervour. The process of dogmatic cognitive inquiry is a futile attempt to square the circle. New foundations are laid, new assertions asserted, certain nuances banned. If the dogmatic urge reaches its maximal zenith, the gates to its perfect kingdom are sealed, devouring itself in the lust of its own image. If the dogmatic urge is left uninterrupted, it has an inevitable orientation towards intellectual calcification. This amounts to a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop in the cognitive system. All influences which assist the unitary impulse of dogmatic thinking are maximized, whereas anything which inhibits this ideal is expelled beyond the confines of the sub-question or ruthlessly exterminated as wrong on the level of a sin of cognition. As structures of the dogmatic develop with negligible outside influence, they often become inflexible to change, maladapted to anything beyond their assumptive remit. This is why it is impossible for the archetypal dogmatist to see the forest for the trees, to see the truth of the territory beyond their abstracted map. For the anxieties invoked by the intellectual uncertainty of the meta-question, the dogmatic urge allows an escape. It's abundantly clear that we don't have the natural constitution for what lies beyond our personally beloved sub-questions. The walled garden of the dogmatist is a heaven, but never forget, the police control heaven. The dogmatist both benefits and falters from knowing who and what lies within their walls. Buying into a sub-question in its cognitive industry amounts to intellectual house arrest. The dogmatic urge taps into that primordial vision of the other, our deep biology of tribal friend and foe, against who we are naturally driven to defend ourselves. The other is uncertainty. The other inhabits the meta-question. The other is the iconoclast. Knowing the tribe of the sub-question when faced by the threat of the meta-question kicks the social reality of in-group preference into the hyper-reality of ideas. Justification for violence is ported into intellectual modes, then applied to cognitive groupings. Aggression can be justified towards our other on a material and emotional basis. Threats to our sub-question justify anything.